Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and today we are gathered to mourn the passing of chapters 6 and 7 of Salem's Lot.
No, I won't let them go. These chapters are only 6 and 7. They're just boys. Chapters so young can't be dead.
Relax, Matt. You can just reread them.
Okay. Let's move on.
Amen. This week on the show, Danny Glick might not be quite as dead as we first originally thought, and we finally meet Per Callahan. And then lastly, Matt inadvertently invites what appears to be some sort of vampire into his home. We'll be discussing chapter 6 and 7 of Salem's Lot. And Matt, I want to know what you thought of this week's reading.
Well, I really shouldn't have invited that vampire into my home. No,
it's always a mistake. Always.
Basically, these are, I think, maybe two of my favorite chapters up to this point. The funeral chapter is another sort of tour de force where it's like every paragraph is perfect, and it all just chains into the next thing, and then it leads toward the burying of the unsuccessful burying of the vampire body. And then, of course, the relatively short subsequent chapter is also really great. We kind of get to know Matt a little bit better, and then it really amps up into a kind of horror that I don't think I've seen before.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on there. And I forgot to mention last week that these two chapters were going to be serving as the end of part 1 of the book, which I think is structurally done this way for a very specific reason, as I think we'll get into as we go through this week's reading. But we are moving into a new phase of the story from here on out.
Yeah, it feels like it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's going to be fun. So let's waste no further time and get right into it. I don't think we had any announcements this week, so just let's talk about some Salem's Lot.
All right.
Let's begin with chapter 6, the Lot 2, another chapter where we kind of jump around all of our residents of Salem's Lot. And the beginning of this chapter, I think, is a really interesting and beautiful one, Matt, because this chapter kind of has King writing about the transition of Salem's Lot into the fall. And he has this beautiful rumination on the nature of spring and fall in New England. Here, just like a little snippet of it. But spring is not the finest season in New England. It's too short, too uncertain, too apt to turn savage on short notice. Even so, there are April days which linger in the memory even after one has forgotten the wife's touch or the feel of the baby's toothless mouth on a nipple. I think this is really important, Matt, because I think what King is doing here with these spring and fall shifts is crafting a metaphor of what is about to start happening in Salem's Lot, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because we have this town. I mean, he says New England broadly, but we're talking about Salem's Lot here. And in this town, he says springs are too short, too apt to turn savage. Spring, of course, is like in literature. Whenever you use spring in any kind of imagery, it's usually about new beginnings, about birth, new life, right? These things, and I think King kind of draws that to us specifically here, and kind of indicates to us that yes, that is what I am using spring for when he compares the days in April to the feel of a baby's toothless mouth at the nipple, right? This is new life, this is new beginnings, but it doesn't last for very long.
Right. I mean, you could link it up to the idea of childhood, and mm-hmm. then the idea that we have a dead child.
Yeah,
in this chapter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very fitting that this is the chapter of the burial of a child. Yeah.
I also think there's some more subliminal painting with words, because I would never think to use the word savage to describe the way in which spring weather is sometimes bad. Mm-hmm. But King here is creating a certain feeling with that word choice.
Sure.
So he's, savage is a word that he's putting in your brain to get you a little bit on edge, I think.
Yeah. And of course, on the other side of the coin, the season change that we're actually talking about here specifically is the change to fall. And on the other side of the coin, King says that autumn sticks around for a while. When fall comes, kicking summer out on its treacherous ass as it always does, one day sometime after the midpoint of September, it stays a while like an old friend that you have missed. It settles in the way an old friend will settle into your favorite chair and take out his pipe and light it, and then fill the afternoon with stories of places he has been and things he has done since he last saw you. And this is, of course, spring. If spring is new life, fall generally represents maturity, right? And here King paints that metaphor again by the comparison as an old friend sitting down in an old chair and doing an old person habit, smoking a pipe and telling old stories. And then, of course, in the reference here, at least specifically in New England, right, fall is just a prelude to winter, to death. So we have a place in which when there is new life, it is short and fleeting. Oldness tends to stick around for a while, and that oldness is just a prelude to the inevitability of death.
Yeah, right. It's you get a brief sweet youth, and then you just linger and die. Yeah, right. I mean, the impression overall is like spring is savage and unpredictable. Summer sucks because it's too hot. Fall is nice, except you're going to die because winter is coming.
Isn't it interesting that he describes summer as treacherous, right? Why is summer the treacherous month, right? Kicking summer out on its treacherous ass.
I don't really understand. Like, it's interesting because, look, I've never actually lived in the Northeast. I think of like I've lived in the South where it gets, 115 degrees in the summer. And so when people talk about the summer in the Northeast being, unpleasant, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But maybe it's I mean, maybe it does get really hot up there.
It can get into the mid to high 90s. And they obviously are much less central air. Much more made for cooler, colder temperatures. So it's hot, and it can get muggy up there. There's parts of Maine where it gets really, really humid as well. So
yeah,
they can get pretty rough summers.
Sure. I'm being a bit of a dick. I mean, I've lived on the West Coast, and I've noticed that, like, when your house doesn't have central air or really any kind of air conditioning at all, even 85 can be miserable. So maybe that's it. I don't really understand. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from somebody in the who lives or has lived in the Northeast. Like, what is he talking about here exactly? Because everybody has strong opinions about the weather of the place they live.
Yeah. And of course, the first day of what King has so ominously described as fall happens to also be the day of Danny Glick's funeral. And of course, just like we talked about at the beginning, I can't think of anything more opposed to the idea of new life and youth than the death and the burial of a child, right? Like this is the opposite of everything that spring represents here. And of course, it is on the first day of fall. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah. It's our symbolic things are going in a negative direction.
Yes. The funeral itself is open to the public, and basically the entire town turns out. King reads their names like Tolkien reads the name of men joining up in his armies. Like, he takes some time to list every single person in Salem's Lot who is attending this funeral. Some of these names we've heard before. Some of them are still new to us. We have not met every single resident of the town, apparently, Matt.
That's I love that comparison. That's great. Not one that I thought of. So good job covering me.
Wow.
On the Tolkien references.
Yeah, much less Tolkien references here in season 2, Matt. I'm a little disappointed.
I guess I just haven't really been thinking about this book as a Tolkien thing, but I should be, obviously.
A small town with vampires in it? Come on.
That's the Shire.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like a great host assembling for battle.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of guessing this is maybe the last time we'll see a lot of these characters in one place and or alive.
Sure. Or some of them could be unalive. Yeah. So Mike Ryerson and Royal Snow have dug out the grave for the boy. And I think it's really interesting here that King kind of takes the time to point out here through Mike that Royal has been behaving oddly. Like, he's not his old usual self. He seems like he and his buddy Hank Peters have been spreading some more cash around than they've usually had, and they're sullen and something's bothering them. And I really like this just because this is kind of King daisy chaining back to the events of last week, right? Where Hank and Royal were characters that are the ones that went down into the basement, that put the vampire's coffin, we're assuming, down there, and had that interaction with Crockett that basically said, hey, we're pretty sure we know where this kid who we're burying right now's brother is. And they've had to keep it a secret to themselves. So like, I just love the way like he just kind of he offhandedly mentions, oh, Royal's missing because and we, the reader, know where this is coming from, right? We know why Royal's missing. We know why Hank Peters has more money. We know all this stuff. And it just, I think, allows us to like link and travel through the town as if we're riding those telephone wires of gossip and through the town. I don't know. I just really like it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you're efficiently establishing and tracking these outward expanding ripples of evil, and yes, making it feel like a real town, and you know, showing that everything is sort of collapsing slowly but inexorably. Yeah.
So Ryerson is there to finish up the burial after the funeral happens, but he's there before the thing starts, and he has some extra time, so he chats with. Hey, it's Father Callahan, Matt. We at last meet the quartet member that is the reason we're reading this entire book. Here we are, 250 pages into it, and here's Father Callahan for the first time. We'll discuss the pair more in detail later in these chapters, but I think it's a good thing to point out here, at least, that King introduces Father Callahan via his drinking problem. We have this line right here. Callahan seemed nice enough for a Pope lover. His funerals were calm and comforting and always short. Ryerson doubted if Callahan had gotten all those red and broken veins in his cheeks and around his nose from praying, but if Callahan did a little drinking, who was to blame him? The way the world was, it was a wonder all these preachers didn't end up in loony bins. So there we go. Our introduction to Callahan is also an introduction to Callahan's problem with alcohol.
Yeah, I was wondering if the whole alcoholism element of his character was something that would be prominent in this book, or if that was like a minor element that King maybe decided to emphasize, or maybe to create out of whole cloth for the Dark Tower. But no, this was always a super central element of Callahan's character.
Yeah.
And you know, so far alcoholism has been a central idea of this book. So yeah, that is very interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a disease that, you know, like the disease that it's the center of the town, it like posts up in you and just kind of rots you from the inside. Right. So that is an interesting comparison. I think we'll kind of see how this plays out more. I have so much I want to say about Father Callahan and want to discuss with you about Father Callahan here, but we'll wait till we get in his head a little bit more.
Sounds good.
But for now, I think King's having fun with this chapter. So the funeral begins and King puts us in the head of Callahan as he starts to give the service. And I love, he goes back to this old mantra he has, this old credo he has, which is, God grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot, the tenacity to change what I may, and the good luck not to fuck up too often. Which is, I mean, he's thinking about this as he's beginning this child's funeral. And of course, I think we'll all recognize this, right? I think we've all probably heard this Serenity Prayer at some point, right? It's kind of a blasphemous rephrasing of the Serenity Prayer, but it's the God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, right?
Right.
And this, of course, was written by theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. I had to look that up. But the reason most of us have heard this prayer before is because it was popularized by Alcoholics Anonymous. They used this prayer very specifically in a lot of the AA programs. This is interesting because it's something that Per Callahan either does not know or refuses to acknowledge, right?
Yeah, that is really interesting. God, I love the kind of ambiguity with which alcoholism is being treated in this story, where we have so many alcoholic characters, and then we have like worse alcoholic characters, and then we have the alcoholic characters looking down on the worse alcoholic characters. Well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I can't help but feel that King isn't just like in denial about his addiction at this point, but he's instead doing like an elaborate piece of performance art about pretending to himself and everyone else that he is aware of his problem, but obviously he has it well in hand, because how could you write a book like this and not have a handle on it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing we're going to see about all of King's early works, where you're just like, how could you not see? I mean, we talked about this on an episode before, but the idea that like he's a man who wrote The Shining and wrote The Shining without accepting or to his words, realizing that he was writing about himself in a lot of ways. And so I think it's really interesting. I think the way King views alcoholism through the lens of Father Callahan in this book, as compared to the way he viewed it through Father Callahan in Wolves of the Calla, is really interesting. And I want to talk to you about that a lot when we get to the Callahan section of the book, because I think it's definitely different. And I think that's just him as a person looking at these things different. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think sometimes maybe you're just putting all this on the page. I mean, he's talked so much about how writing is confession, and you're putting all this on the page as if to push it away from you, right? Like, that's not me. And if you make it worse than you currently are, then maybe you feel better about yourself. Like okay, I might be drinking a little too much, but like, at least I'm not like this guy.
Right. Yeah. It probably plays into the sort of double think that we're always engaged in, where like there's a constant thing that every single person does, where you're reframing the facts of the matter in a way that makes you look a little bit better. Mm-hmm. You're kind of doing that for yourself all day, every day. And I guess some people have a voice that instead of reframing it so that you look better, they reframe it so that you look worse, because I think that's a big part of what, depression is, for example. But, but I feel like writers might actually be particularly good at this, in a way that might not help them, which is why so many writers succumb to substance abuse. This is just me talking, by the way. I don't really know if this is true, but like, I feel like if you're that good at like spinning thoughts, then at a certain point you are spinning your own thoughts too well to actually keep track of, and you kind of outflank yourself.
That's really fascinating. I've never thought about it that way, but I think you have a point there, and I'll leave the professionals who actually can diagnose this stuff to say for certain, but I like that train of thought at least. Yeah.
I really don't like to psychoanalyze Stephen King, but when he writes a book like this, he kind of does invite it a little bit.
Certainly. I mean, I think that's like part of the fun of doing this series, to me, is getting to understand King as a person a little bit better. And obviously it's not the person he is, but rather the person he shows a little window into via his novels, right? Yeah. I mean, I just finished reading a book called Lisey's Story, which is King's book that's basically dedicated to his wife. It's a beautiful, beautiful story that I think has a lot of personal stuff in it. Of course, it's also highly fiction. It's just kind of the way it works. So, yeah. I mean, I loved that book, and I love it even more as a lens into the ways in which Stephen King absolutely loves his wife. And so I think this is fun. I don't know.
That's awesome. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. As for the funeral itself, it is unsurprisingly soul-crushing, but I think it's really interesting. Again, I think King's doing something really interesting here. This is a Catholic sermon. We have a Catholic priest, and he's giving a Catholic death prayer. And it's really interesting the ways that phrases like life after death and resurrection like hit different when you know, as we do now, that Danny Glick is a vampire and is about to come back from the dead. Like, I mean, just listen to this with vampire in the back of your head. I am the resurrection and the life. The man who believes in me will live even though he dies, and every living person who puts his faith in me will never suffer eternal death. Lord, you wept at the death of Lazarus, your friend. Comfort us now in your sorrow. We ask this in faith. You raised to the dead to give life. Give our brother Daniel eternal life. We ask this in faith. He was nourished with your body and blood. Right? Like, I mean, this is... I think this is for a very specific reason. Like, I think the iconography of Christianity has always been heavily involved in the idea of the vampire mythos, but there's just something about the use of these phrases, which in any, mundane funeral would just sound like standard, Catholic prayers. But it's just, when we're dealing with vampires, it's just, it hits differently.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing makes you remember that the whole vampire mythos is indeed a pretty direct perversion of Christian, theology, or at least this version of the vampire mythos. I know there's obviously many, but it comes off as creepy. In particular, that like every word of the Catholic funeral rite reminds you of some kind of vampiric ritual.
Yes. And I mean, King is not fucking around with this, because a little bit later in the chapter, he will directly compare the two, right? Like he will directly compare the death prayer, the Catholic death prayer, with the same prayer that the vampire, or we're guessing is the vampire, gave that night in the cemetery when he presented the boy, right? Which is just really does a really great job of drawing the line between these two things.
Yeah, right. I definitely was thinking about well, so yeah, we'll talk about that when we get there. Yeah.
Sure. But meanwhile, Danny's father just loses it. He's convinced his son isn't dead. He's right though, and falls into the grave. I love this incredible, horrific, heartbreaking moment. And King intersperses the wails of Tony Glick with Father Callahan attempting to press on with the ceremony, which I think makes it even worse. I'm not sure how the audiobook handled it, but like just the structure of the page, which just has like a line of prayer intercut with like the wails of Tony Glick. And then another line of prayer, like trying to move on, like, and then just another intercut wail. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, basically what the audiobook does is the reader goes full on, wailing, acting out, Tony Glick's grief, and then cutting back to kind of the almost kind of muted, prayer voice that happens at all religious ceremonies, in a way that's, creepy and unsettling, which I think is the desired effect.
Yeah.
It's horrific.
It really is. And I think King kind of turns the screw on this a little bit, because we see Mabel Wirtz over here observing this tragedy, and not just observing it, right? She pressed her black silk funeral hanky to her lips. Her eyes were bright and avid, storing this the way a squirrel stores nuts for the winter. And it just makes you hate her, right? Like, yeah. She sees this thing, and the first thing on her mind is, oh, this will be a great story to tell someone later when poor Danny Glick's father lost it at his funeral.
Yeah, this will be great gossip, right? Yeah, and of course Mabel is the town, remember?
Right.
And so here the town is sort of observing, storing away, or remembering, keeping this into its deep log of time, right?
Yeah. 20 years from now, people will be sitting around a bar talking about the time that poor Tony Glick lost it. And
well, thankfully everybody's going to be dead. So.
Well, yeah, there we go. Yeah. So the funeral ended. Mike Ryerson waits for Royal Snow to come back and help him finish the job, but Royal doesn't show, and Mike is forced to do it himself. And then this is when shit gets weird, Matt. I think this is, to me, one of the most well-written horror sections Stephen King has ever written. And I know that's a bold claim that I can't back up in any way, because like I don't have a list of them in front of me that I can say, no, definitely better than this. Oh, no worse than this. But I can say it. There's a microphone in front of my face, and I'm going to say it. This is horrifying and wonderful. It's so fucking good, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I mean, I've read much less than you, but I definitely was, riveted. I thought this was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, because we have here Ryerson like almost immediately starts feeling like he's being watched, and he quickly realizes that feeling isn't coming from around him, but from inside the coffin itself. And then he's suddenly losing time. 45 minutes, an hour goes by, and he's only shoveled 6 shovelfuls of dirt into the grave. He's like going into trances. He's becoming more and more unhinged as the story goes. It's wonderful. It's just like King takes the dial and just, and it's just perfect.
Yeah, right. It escalates. It goes from like a little bit worrying to like extremely alarming, and then you realize he's zoning out, as you say. He's losing time, and it's just like you're way more worried than the character is, and you're kind of, I guess there's a dramatic irony element, because you he should be running pretty much from the beginning, and you're just watching him kind of not understand what's happening and get sucked into it.
I love the way the line "stop staring at me" is played multiple times, and the progression of the tension of the scene and the stakes of the scene, and poor Mike Ryerson's unhinged nature is that he starts thinking it, right? It starts as a line of internal thought, and by the end of the piece, he's screaming it out loud, and just that progression from he's abandoned all idea of social normities at this point. Like he's gone so crazy that he's screaming at a dead boy in a coffin to stop staring at him. And I just think that's a wonderful way of like, stop staring at me, stop staring at me, stop staring at me. And it just progresses from silently thought to silently thought more intense, just screaming it. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of tracking the way that he kind of goes from being totally calm to being completely irrational and almost raving. And it also, I think, is pointing out something that I think is kind of becoming more and more clear, which is that the vampires in this story operate a lot through this sort of telepathic hypnotism.
Sure.
There's this, I think this is, kind of obviously going to be a big part of the way they operate.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, we'll see it like 3 times today.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Which is, I think, a very standard, like kind of old fashioned vampire ability. Right. Mm-hmm. So I really love, we kind of talked about this already, but this moment where the Catholic prayer for the dead starts getting mixed in with the prayer we heard that strange dark man give in this very cemetery at the end of the first Salem's Lot chapter. And this kind of back and forth mix between, so we have Mike Ryerson thinking about the Catholic prayer and repeating it in his head. And then in parentheticals, where you assume coming from the boy that's supposed to be dead in the coffin is this other prayer, this prayer to the Lord of Flies. And it's so wonderfully creepy.
Yeah. That bit was probably the pinnacle of creepiness to me. So at around this point, I got this idea in my head about how, like, what the strange dark man is saying is indeed a kind of prayer. Right. And there's a moment at the end of that prayer where he kind of pauses thoughtfully and kind of almost like he seems to wait. And I thought that was really interesting at the time. And I think that's really interesting still, because I was like, well, what is he waiting for? Like, it reminds me of, how, in real life, a person will pray, maybe asking for something, maybe asking for a sign, or just, seeing if anything's going to happen. Because, so like maybe this dark figure isn't sure what's going to happen. Like maybe they don't actually know if the thing that they're praying to is listening. And so the reason I think that's interesting is, like, maybe, these creatures have their own issues with faith, just like Callahan has his issues with faith.
Interesting. I like it.
I don't know. I mean, I guess one big anchor that's making me think about this is just the fact that we have Callahan at some point is going to confront these vampires and he's going to fail. And Barlow is going to say what he says, something like always ashamed to see a man's faith fail. So maybe these vampires do have faith in the thing that they are serving. It's been a minor beat that we haven't really emphasized much in our discussions, but there is this idea that there's like Satan worshipers and they're desecrating churches and stuff. And it's like, well, part of me doesn't think that King had fully formed the idea of the Crimson King at this point. So maybe these vampires are the Satan worshipers, and so the faith that they have is the faith in in Satan, in the Antichrist, in evil.
In capital E evil. Yeah,
capital E evil, exactly. Yeah. So I'm kind of fumbling for a lot of different things there, but the basic connection being the vampires, in some sense, might have issues with faith in their their god in the same sense as Callahan does.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll keep that in mind as we get to know these vampires a little bit more in the future.
Yeah, cool.
So I also really like the way King tracks time here by showing the sun's progression relative to the Marston house, right? Like we get like 3/4 of the house was in daylight. Now just the tip. It's just it's so wonderful. It really allows that foreboding feeling to ramp up. Like everything in the scene is doing work to increase tension. There's not one element of it. It's all of it. It's all of it together to like make this one of just the most uncomfortable scenes to read.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it.
And then, I mean, we like see Mike go from scared, irrationally scared, to just unhinged, right? I love this part. Shovel out the dirt. That was the ticket. Shovel it out and break the lock with the shovel and open the coffin and close those awful staring eyes. He had no mortician's gum, but he had 2 quarters in his pocket. That would do as well. Silver. Yes, silver was what the boy needed. It's just perfectly. He's just lost it. Like that's nonsense what he just said there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is funny because, isn't there silver and vampires a thing somehow, somewhere?
Depending on, there's so many different vampire things, but yes,
I think
yes.
Normally it's werewolves, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think King is definitely doing something there.
Sure. Yeah.
It's and this is about when he realizes that something is terribly wrong, but of course he's far too gone and it's too late.
Yeah, I love that, right? Where he's like, wait a minute, what the fuck am I doing?
Right.
And then but he's been kind of hypnotized or tranced long enough where he's being urged on to do it anyway.
Yeah, he can't pull out anymore. Yeah.
I really like this line, Venus glowed against the breast of the sky. It comes out of nowhere. Like Ryerson looks up into the air and that's what we see. And I was wondering what your thoughts on it are.
I guess so. Like he's down in the grave, right?
Yes.
Other than the fact that it's emphasizing that all he can see is the night sky with one, Venus is usually, if Venus is in the sky, Venus is often the first star that you see.
Yeah.
I know it's not a star. Don't at me. And so it's like now it is full night basically, or the beginning of night. Mm-hmm. And he's in the grave and he's fucked.
Sure.
But I mean, the language of, Venus in the breast of the sky, I think that's just poetic and beautiful. I don't quite know what exactly, the intention is there. But
yeah. I don't have an answer for you either. I was just really curious. It just sticks out at you. I think it is King using evocative language to like stick in your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
So Mike rips the coffin lid off finally, and the eyes were open, just as he had known they would be, wide open and hardly glazed at all. They seemed to sparkle with hideous life in the last dying light of day. There was no death pallor in the face. The cheeks seemed rosy, almost juicy with vitality. He tried to drag his eyes away from the glittering, frozen stare and was unable. He muttered, Jesus. The sun's diminishing arc passed below the horizon. And then we cut away. We'll come back to Mike Ryerson in the next chapter, and we have a pretty good idea of how exactly this whole encounter ended. But what do you think about King's choice to cut away here, right before the moment?
Well, it keeps us tantalized as to exactly what the nature of the vampirism in the story is and what's going on, and I like that. I think that's the MO that he's pursuing with this whole book. Really, is keep them tantalized, keep them not really knowing what it is that we're afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think we'll get into this in the next chapter a little bit, but it's such a big change to like move over into the truly supernatural and to put name to it. I think that's one thing we'll see in either of these chapters is even when our characters have basically connected the dots about what's going on here, no one has said the word vampire yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
All right, so we break away from this and head on over to meet up with good old Mark Petrie, who is up in his room working on his Universal Monsters figures. We know that he has this complete collection of Universal Monsters figures. He's working on Frankenstein right now, but we do know he has Dracula as well, Matt. Just he's no reason why we're throwing it out there.
Yeah, no reason that's being mentioned specifically here.
This is the first time we've seen Mark Petrie since he beat up a bully, and it's the first time we've been in his head. And so we get to see a little bit about who Mark Petrie is, and we'll see here that he has an analytical mind, which is kind of how he explains his ability to beat up a bully. He analyzed the problem and solved it. Most bullies, he had decided, were big and ugly and clumsy. They scared people by being able to hurt them. They fought dirty. Therefore, if you were not afraid of being hurt a little, if you were willing to fight dirty, a bully might be bested. Richie Bodden had been the first full vindication of his theory. I love this. Yeah.
Like you said, Mark Petrie is very analytical, but in particular, his cold analytical nature persists even when there is actually a big, scary bully challenging him, which is not true for most people.
No. But might come in useful in some sort of, I don't know, vampire book?
Some kind of life and death scenario, perhaps.
Yeah. So Mark here is listening to his parents chat about him downstairs through a heater vent, something I 100% did as a kid. I don't know if you ever lived in a house where this was possible, but yeah, we did this all the time.
It's funny. I mean, not this literal thing, but I'm sure I took every opportunity.
So his parents are chatting about how worried about their son they are and if he should be allowed into the woods behind the house in the daytime and all this other stuff. And I like this part right here. Tony Glick, unfortunate, but death and grief are part of living. Time he got used to the idea. Maybe. Another long pause. What was coming now, he wondered. The child is a father of the man, maybe? Or as the twig is bent, the tree is shaped? Mark glued the monster onto his base, which was a grave mound with leaning headstone in the background. In the midst of life, we're in death, but I may have nightmares. So that's his mother giving a quote. And the thing we learn is like the big character defining aspect of his mother, at least in Mark Petrie's head, is she always saying these random life sayings.
Yeah.
And of course, the one she gives here is in the midst of life, we're in death. We've heard that before. Uh-huh. That is when we were in the Mike Ryerson section while he was seeing the remnants of the fire that burned half the town up. That's what he thought, or that's what the narrator said when it was in his point of view.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that's like a specifically biblical or at least religious line too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't remember the exact context of it. Other than, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's a funeral type thing. But
yeah, I mean, it's just connecting us.
Yeah,
it's connecting the chapters back. It's connecting the characters. It's linking this town together. Like we're seeing the same phrases used. Like there's so many moments throughout these chapters that we're just linking everything together. Everything's connected in this town. They're all part of the town.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Mark is gluing a monster onto a grave mound while listening to this.
Mark Petrie, though, doesn't think his parents need to worry. He's a normal guy who has never suffered much in his middle-class existence. And then we get this part that I need to talk to you about for a while. If there was anything that set him apart, it was the reservoir of remoteness, of cool self-control. No one had inculcated him to it. He seemed to have been born with it. When his pet dog Chopper had been hit by a car, he had insisted on going with his mother to the vet's. And when the vet had said, "The dog has to be put to sleep, my boy. Do you understand why?" Mark said, "You're not going to put him to sleep. You're going to gas him to death, aren't you?" The vet said yes. Mark told him to go ahead, but he had kissed Chopper first. He had felt sorry, but he hadn't cried, and tears had never been close to the surface. His mother had cried, but 3 days later, Chopper was in the dim past to her, and he would never be in the dim past for Mark. That was the value in not crying. Crying was like pissing everything out on the ground. We're going to talk about this for a while.
Yeah. God, Jesus. Like, yet another great, one paragraph where you're just like, holy shit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love this. For one thing, it seems like I'm wrong about Mark Petrie being some kind of badass kid from the streets. That's not why he is like this. He just is like this. He's just, that's what's kind of ironic about it, is he actually seems like a remarkably sensitive young man who is fully aware of the ways in which suffering and loss is just a part of the fabric of the world.
Sure.
And he's capable of seeing it and accepting it and living with it without minimizing it, without pushing it away. He's kind of a lot like Ben Mears in the sense that I think of them both as being like sensitive men who have sort of learned to live with that sensitivity rather than burying it somehow. Although you could argue that Ben Mears is burying his with alcohol, I guess. And for some reason, Mark reminds me a little bit of the Gunslinger as well. Just like I don't know what exactly it is about this, but just like the willingness to look the truth in the face and accept it.
Yeah, the steel that it takes to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there is a childhood innocence to this a little bit, right? Like, I love the line the section ends with is, "Understand death? Sure. That was when the monsters got you." Mm-hmm. And so he has this he's a person who sees the world for what it is. And that includes a world in which there are monsters. Like, he's obviously really into monsters. He's collecting all these. Like, we have the Dracula and the Mad Doctor and Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll and Frankenstein. Like, he's into these monsters. And he seems like a kid who just accepts the existence of them. Mm-hmm. And so he accepts the existence of monsters. He accepts the existence of death. He accepts that these things happen and they're sad. And like, but it's not like, it's this combination of childhood innocence and a deep kind of mature level of understanding that I find really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I agree. I like this character. It's really great.
Yeah. He's really great. I can't wait to see more of him.
Yeah.
But speaking of monsters, we then cut over to old Roy Mcdougall, who's coming home drunk to see his wife once again beating their infant son, punching him in the face once again. So Roy, of course, responds to the beating of his child by threatening to beat his wife a little bit.
Yeah.
This little vignette doesn't really go anywhere directly in the story as it is, but it makes you feel really fucking bad for this baby, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it dashes any hope we might have had that whacking her baby was like a one-time loss of control. It establishes that there's this ongoing dynamic of domestic violence and threats. And so we got that little tinderbox kind of just sitting there in the story.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's just like, all of them are terrible people. And it's, I think the reason why King puts this here is obviously so he can call back to it when we go to Father Callahan's section of this chapter. And so it's kind of fresh in our mind when Father Callahan thinks back about old Sandy Mcdougall. But I think it's just horrifying. Like King is he's so good at writing from the perspective of these absolute assholes. And like, Sandy obviously is not great, but Roy is just the worst. Like the things he thinks, and like he's in the moment of like his baby's screaming, crying, his wife is losing it, and she like bends over to pick something up, and he's like, "Oh, getting kind of fat, isn't she?" Like it's just awful.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. We're just there are certain characters in this story that we're not supposed to have a super nuanced feeling about, and I think he would be one.
Yeah, and I mean the thing we have to ask ourselves is we've got this dynamic that King has created where we're told about these different kinds of evil, right? We're told about this vapid evil that Matt called it, or a lowercase evil that Father Callahan's about to put a word to it. And then we have this looming presence of the Marston house and the vampires that now reside within it. And that's our capital E evil, right? And what are these two things, and how do these two things relate to each other, and how does one talk about another, right? Like, I mean, the vampiric evil that is about to invade this town is representative of something. And what is it? And I think to see that, we'll have to see how it interacts with these other kind of evils that have existed in this town for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Awesome.
So back over at the dump, we meet up with our old pal Dud Rogers, who has lit a bunch of trash fires and is now watching it burn. And we get this line, Matt: "Out in the dump's wasteland, a wide bed of coals waxed and waned with the vagaries of the wind, reminding him of a huge red eye opening and closing."
Yeah, well, I guess I was wrong. I guess the Crimson King is here fully formed.
I mean, so no. One thing we learn about the vampires in these chapters is they have glowing red eyes, right? And so I think the huge red eye opening and closing is meant to be an allusion to the red eyes of the vampire. But we are playing in the world of Stephen King wrote this down because a turtle sung to him, and therefore it all comes from somewhere.
Yeah. And
so, yeah, there's the Eye of the Crimson King there existing in 1975.
Yeah, sure. I mean, who knows? Maybe King was, rereading this book at some point and realized that the Crimson King had been here all along.
I love it, right? I mean, like, obviously, yes, there's nothing we can say definitively with this, but let's have fun with it. This man has lit a fire and has made a signal to the coming of the Crimson King. And of course, who is standing there but Mr. Barlow himself?
Yeah, right. The first time that we are sure that we are seeing Barlow. Yeah, I mean, there've been mysterious figures at different points, but I suspect this is the first time we've seen Barlow. That's just a guess, but
okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of Barlow, since we get to see him for the first time, we get to describe him for the first time. And here it is. The man turned toward him. The face that was discovered in the red glow of the dying fire was high cheekboned and thoughtful. The hair was white, streaked with an oddly virile slashes of iron gray. The guy had it swept back from his high, waxy forehead like one of those concert pianists. The eyes caught and held the red glow of the embers and made them look bloodshot. That's because they're actually red. So here he is. We don't actually get his name here. I don't think he says he's Mr. Barlow here, but he basically says he's Mr. Barlow.
Right. He's clearly not Straker, and he's
and he admits that he's one of the residents of the Marston house. Yeah. So Barlow here says that he loves the predators of the night, rats, owls, wolves, but that he really, really hates dogs. He thinks we should gut all the dogs.
Yeah. Dogs, the animal that defends mankind against the terrors of the night. that will sacrifice their lives for us. Yeah, those are the ones that suck. Yeah. By the way, the audiobook reader does a delightful sort of like subtle Eastern European, Transylvanian, if you will, accent.
That's so good.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I love that.
I was so happy to hear that. It's this, smooth accent. You're just like, yeah, yes, exactly right.
But I think, we go back to the poor dead dog at the beginning of this book, right? And now we've had Mr. Barlow here say very specifically, I hate them. We should gut them all.
Yeah.
And so now we maybe know why that poor dog was taken out.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe, or maybe the dog even, kind of sniffed him out because it seems like a dog would sort of naturally notice that something was horribly wrong with the vampire. But also this guy just hates dogs. Maybe he just was like, oh, a dog, I'll just kill it.
Fucking kill this dog. Yeah. Loves rats though. I love the return to our rat imagery from earlier in the book, right? We have, now there's another rat here. The rat is behaving unusually again. It's not behaving like a normal rat. Like he shoots a gun at it, it misses, and the rat just like stands up and stares down Dud. That is not normal animal behavior. And it seems like that these predators of the night that Barlow loves so much are behaving a little bit differently when he's around.
Yeah, they've got toxoplasmosis.
What?
It makes rats lose their sense of fear. That's all it is.
Is that a real phrase?
Toxoplasmosis?
Yeah.
Well, I might be mispronouncing it, but toxoplasma, I think, is the bacteria. It's the one that makes rats lose their fear of cats. It makes them actually attracted to the smell of cat urine.
This is a thing?
It's one of those brain parasites that's terrifying, where the rat loses their fear of cats. They seek out cat urine. Cats find them, obviously, and kill them and eat them. And then the parasite proceeds with the next part of its life cycle inside the cat.
That's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it also makes humans more or less risk averse.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it's one of those terrifying brain parasite things that exists and is actually somewhat common.
The world is very scary.
Yeah, it's not even a fungus. I think it's just like a bacterium.
Awesome.
Yeah, shit. Like this is why you can make a hard sci-fi story with vampires, Scott, is because the world is already terrifying.
Yes, I am now scared.
Good.
I'm going to be looking around for strange rat behavior everywhere I go. Because I see rats all the time in suburban Texas.
Yeah. Or, cats carry it, people can carry it.
What about dogs?
No, I think dogs are immune, actually.
There you go. That's why Barlow's taking out the dogs.
Exactly. See, this completely unplanned tangent really actually led somewhere interesting.
All right, back on track. The strange Mr. Barlow gives Dud the stare down, and he instantly finds himself hypnotized. I think this is funny because not only does Dud get hypnotized, but he also takes a minute to go, oh, dang, I'm hypnotized.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Oh, no. So, this is really interesting because I think ever since the first chapter, I've kind of been wondering in the back of my mind what a person who didn't know that this was a vampire story would be thinking. We actually had a couple of our listeners come back with some of the inside jacket summaries and covers from some of the original printings. None of them say the word vampire in them, by the way. There is one, I don't think it was a first edition, but it was a paperback edition of this book from the 70s that had a giant vampire head on the front of it. So not as subtle, but none of the summaries say vampire. So I think you can kind of tell that even the marketing material was kind of playing close to the chest with the vampire thing.
Yeah.
But I really think this is kind of the moment where the book wants you to start figuring it out. Like officially wants you. Like I guess you could maybe argue when the boy's eyes are open in the coffin, but there's like lots of things that can be in coffins and maybe he's not alive. Maybe he's just there with his eyes open being creepy.
Yeah.
You don't know for sure.
That's right. That's one thing that you notice is the book carefully did not show him, lifting his arms to reach for the guy's neck or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. But I think this is where you have this, to your point, a man with a Transylvanian accent kind of, with his hair slicked back is now hypnotizing Dud. And I think the evidence of vampirism is really starting to mount here.
Yeah.
And I think King makes that subtext text in the next chapter. He's just ready to pull the trigger on that.
Yeah.
So Barlow knows exactly what poor old Dud wants. He wants Ruthie Crockett, who happens to be our friend Lawrence Crockett, the crooked real estate agent's high school aged daughter. So this is the woman that Dud is obsessed with.
Yeah. That's gross.
God, people in this town really suck.
Yeah.
Barlow promises Ruthie to Dud. He says, "You shall have her. I am sure of it." There was something pleasant about this. Far away, he seemed to hear sweet voices singing foul words. Silver chimes, white faces, Ruthie Crockett's voice. He could almost see her, his hands cupping her titties. Oh, I don't want to read anymore. This is gross. Yeah. She's a high schooler. It was like drowning in the old man's rimmed eyes. As the stranger came closer, Dud understood everything and welcomed it. And when the pain came, it was as sweet as silver, as green as still water at dark fathoms.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not cutting to black necessarily, but we are sort of cutting away from what exactly happens. But it's becoming,
we know there's pain, but
much less vague. Interestingly, though, we have silver chimes, which of course remind me of Toad Ash chimes.
Sure.
Where we're in this kind of hypnotic domain of things becoming otherworldly, and I think that King probably always just had it in his mind that the sound of dissonant chimes was going to be something that he was going to just lean on for creepiness factor.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we go back to the Little Sisters of Eloria and how important the bells were to that particular brand of vampire too.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that he likes the idea of chimes signaling creepiness, because I mean, even just like normal wind chimes can be kind of eerie if if the situation is right. But here it seems like Barlow is seeking out this specific loner who he knows will easily act upon his own weaknesses. Like, the first victim was a child who likewise seemingly will have little resistance to his impulse to seek blood. And I don't know if I'm like building a grand theory here. I guess I only mention this because we don't really know how this vampirism works. And I wonder what would happen if one, if Ben Mears gets bitten, for example, does he have the capacity to resist the bloodlust, or is this a different kind of vampirism? We don't know any of this stuff yet, but it does seem like, by coincidence or by design, the first two people who were bitten are the sort of people who are gonna go out and bite more people.
Sure, definitely. And I mean, I think it's interesting that the way in on this man was via lust, was via this kind of fouling, disgusting version of sexuality that King has so often attached to evil, right? That this man's incredibly inappropriate lust for a young girl is Barlow's window to him. And I'm not saying that Dud was going to lose this encounter no matter what, right? Like whether he was in love with the high school girl or not, like he was going to lose this encounter. But it is very important that this is it. Like this is like we see here that he accepts it, right? Yeah. Like Dud understood everything and welcomed it because he's been like, there has to be a way in, right? I mean, I think it's the thing we've seen in Salem's Lot the whole time, that these guys, they don't just take what they want. They need a way in the door. They need a foot in the door. They needed a foot in the door to buy the house, right? They needed a real estate person to sign off on that. And they need a foot in the door with Dud here. We didn't see how the interaction with Danny Glick went, so we don't know exactly how that worked. But I mean, we'll see the interaction with Mike Ryerson at the end of the thing, which is it is using the vampires need to be invited in thing, that old thing, and making it more metaphorical, right?
Right, because there's not a verbal ascension here, but it does seem that the reason why this proceeds is because he accepts it, as you say.
And I think that helps us kind of start to find the shape of what the vampiric metaphor is in the book, or what it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, basically taking someone's weakness or their kind of willingness to compromise a little bit and asking, well, how far will you compromise once you've compromised a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we cut over from this moment to Father Donald Callahan spilling his booze in his office late on a Sunday night. He's drunk, unsurprisingly, and embarrassed about it. I love this section here. If you went slow and you continued to work on his long, solitary evenings, Father Callahan worked on his notes. He had been working on the notes for nearly 7 years, supposedly a book on the Catholic Church in New England, but he suspected now that the book would never be written. In point of fact, the notes and his drinking problem had begun at the same time. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning there was scotch, and Father Callahan said, "Let there be notes." You were hardly aware of the slow growth of drunkenness. You could educate your hand not to be aware of the bottle's lessening weight.
It's great.
Every time I read these long parentheticals, I wonder how the audiobook reader does it and connect the first half of the sentence to the second half of the sentence when there's like a huge 3-sentence long parenthetical in between it. It just, I don't know how they do it. This is why I'm bad at reading audiobooks, but
I mean, I think often they will have either like a director telling them how to do it, or, you know, they will have to do a couple of takes to get something like this in particular.
Sure.
Where it's like, because you need to know that it's coming so that you change your voice tone and then you resume the voice tone.
Sure. Yeah. You have to like very specifically, the parenthetical has to be in a different tone of voice. Yeah.
Yeah. And with like an appropriate pause at the beginning and end and so forth. It can work out. Sometimes the parentheticals can be a bit much and you lose track, but that's fine.
Interesting. Well, a complete tangent, but here he is, Matt. Here's Father Callahan and his notes that will never be finished and his drunkenness and his embarrassment.
One thing I love about this scene is the detail, the you know, tactile, physical detail of like figuring out how to use the cleaning solution. Yeah. And like he's basically just doing this to avoid having the cleaning lady, you know, look at him judgmentally. And which is such a banal, you know, piece of motivation actually. This is not a serious problem, right? Yeah. It's just kind of low, and it's just kind of is a great symbol for how low he's sunk, I guess. Yeah, I mean, and it's part of the shame of it, and the recognition that he knows he has a problem, and he is ashamed of that problem, and he doesn't want anyone else to know about the problem. I mean, the interesting thing is we're introduced to Callahan through Mike Ryerson, who can look at his face and say, "This guy's a drunk." So like, just even if he cleans up this stuff, it's not like people aren't going to know, right? Like. Yeah. And I have a sneaking suspicion in his drunkenness, he's not going to actually do a very good job, because I do think there's like part of like the cadence of the scene is as he's thinking all these other thoughts, he's going back and trying to read the directions and drunkenly like repeating the directions. And you just imagine like sloppily trying to clean this stuff up because he's wasted. I was half expecting that like he was going to get to the end of the instructions and it was going to be like, do not use on vinyl. And then like the carpet was going to like dissolve, which would have been a good like gag, but that wasn't the tone that we were going for here. I wonder if an earlier version of that had that and he decided to cut it because it didn't mix with the tone, but I think you're right. Yeah. So in the middle of this drunken shamefulness, Father Callahan starts thinking of the confessional, which leads him to think about the confessions of the town. And I think this is really interesting because we've seen Salem's Lot. We've been party to the vapid evils. I really love that phrase. I'm going to keep using it. The vapid evils of Salem's Lot. And I think Father Callahan has one of the most unique and all-encompassing views on these things as well through the confessionals, right? In this particular case, he's thinking of little Sandy Mcdougall and her confessing to beating her child. But this is just we get the idea that this is just one of many of things that he's witnessed to each and every day of the mundane badness of and rot at the core of so many people in this town. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is, at least I think as far as Callahan is concerned, this is the thing that is sort of demoralizing him and driving him to drink. Yeah, and it's interesting because he calls her confession and her evil dull. And this is I think the thing that you might not have seen coming in Callahan. Like
the vapid evils of Salem's Lot and the world are things that he doesn't care about. The social issues, the politics, the social evils, as he calls them. He doesn't care about those things. They don't interest him. The only evil he's interested in is capital EVIL, evil. The true evil of the world. These, like, maybe vampires, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that would be convenient for him. But yeah, I mean, he kind of wants to be this like Templar, this hero standing against evil, which, I mean, since we know how his story ends, it makes it, well, okay, let me rephrase to be specific. We know how his story in this book ends.
Yeah.
And then we know how his story ends, which are two very different things and leave you at essentially diametrically different points.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely in context of this book, it's kind of tragic.
Yeah, I love this phrase. He wanted to see evil with its cerements of deception cast aside, with every feature of its visage clear. He wanted to slug it out toe to toe with evil, like Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier, the Celtics against the Knicks, Jacob against the Angel. But there were no battles. There were only skirmishes of vague resolution. And evil did not wear one face, but many. And all of them were vacuous, and more often than not, the chin was slicked with drool. In fact, he was being forced to the conclusion that there was no evil in the world at all, but only evil, or perhaps evil. And of course, in the first, it's lowercase. In the second, it's just a parenthetical, which I think is just a wonderful little beat that this is one of those moments that I feel bad for you audiobook people, because like it being a parenthetical there is just delightful.
And this is where I have to tell you that the guy actually said, or perhaps evil in parentheses.
Well, that's how they do it. I was wondering in my head, I wonder how they did that. And that's a good call from the director. I think that you have to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, I could tell from the way he was saying it that the other evils were capitalized, and I was not confused at any point. I got what we were doing here.
It's wonderful. Wonderful.
It was fun.
Yeah. It's like you were talking about, he wants this big encounter with evil, and we know he's going to get it. We know he's going to get it, and he's not going to win. And so maybe what the message that we're trying to get here, that maybe we can crack later as we get to it, but because we know the future of the story, is that his view on capital E evil versus parenthetical evil is the wrong one. Mm-hmm. It's not, you don't have it right, Callahan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So throughout this Callahan bit, I kept thinking that one of the first things he says when he relates his story to the Quartet of 19 is that his self-diagnosed deep and profound spiritual struggle and malaise and dissipation was actually just alcoholism the whole time. It was just plain old boring alcoholism at this point in time as well. It wasn't that he was yearning to face against evil. He was just an alcoholic. And I think that's maybe like a piece of King's commentary on his own past highfalutin notions, on his own struggles, where it's like, hey Callahan, is it that you ache to face true evil, or is it just that you like to drink booze? And I mean, obviously Callahan in this story, the character as portrayed on the page, he has this burning desire to face down evil, but mm-hmm. but you know, in context of the Dark Tower, it recontextualizes all that to be sort of King basically saying, I don't know about that actually.
Yeah, I love this, because this is one of those things I've been waiting to talk to you about for how long ago was Wolves of the Caliph? For months and months and months.
It feels like a year or something. Yeah,
I think you're right, and I think what we're seeing here is a person that doesn't understand what alcoholism is writing about alcoholism. Mm-hmm. He knows this character is an alcoholic, and his definition for why is he an alcoholic? Well, it's just he just drinks a lot because he's sad. He's just sad, so he drinks a lot. And I don't think he means anything like, I think he's doing his best. He just doesn't have a full understanding of what the disease is and what it looks like and what people do and how they behave and why. And he just doesn't understand this. And by the time he gets to Wolves of the Caliph, he's a man who's been sober for over a decade. He knows what the disease is. He knows the steps it takes to beat it. And he knows part of those steps are viewing it for what it is. And I think, in the back of my head, I want to say that part of the reason that King returned to this character is he wanted to set this straight, that he wanted to say that, no, actually, that stuff I wrote back in 1975 was just wrong or an excuse. It was just incorrect.
Yeah, right. And I mean, Callahan goes on this journey across dimensions and he spends years and years, failing to conquer his disease before finally succeeding and, ending up in Midworld. And that to me, I think is the more honest or the more, updated, if you will, version of like how King sees this character and this specific issue that he's writing about here.
Yeah, definitely. Not to say that I don't appreciate the Callahan version of Salem's Lot. I do. It's just a much less nuanced take on the thing that experience has lent Stephen King in defining the character in a couple decades time.
Right. And I don't mean to overinterpret and be like, actually, Callahan doesn't really want to face down evil. Like, I think he does. Mm-hmm. It's just the connection between that and his alcoholism is something that King will later decide was not valid.
Right. I mean, he doesn't even make the connection here, right? Yeah. Like, he makes a connection. The notes and his drinking problem had begun at the same time, right? Like, in the beginning, there was scotch, and Father Callahan said, "Let there be notes." So, like, the book doesn't ever come right out and say his spiritual malaise is driving his drinking problem.
That's true.
I think Callahan is so, like, pushing his alcoholism away from him that he's not even ready to admit that much. Like, he's barely accepting that he has a problem. Like, he's not even calling himself an alcoholic here. He's just like, I drink too much sometimes, right. And I'm a little embarrassed about it.
Yeah. But he's and the thing is, like, he is functional as a priest, right? Like, yeah, I don't think anyone would call him, like, inspired or great, but the community seems to be like, yep, that's Father Callahan. He's not known for being an embarrassment. He's, like I think, like you said, they can tell that he's drinking, but it doesn't seem to be affecting his performance. Like one thing you notice is, like, he didn't seem to, like, need to surreptitiously sip from the bottle before the funeral. Like, that was a beat that we did not actually have. So
he's not. Yeah. I mean, he's not like tremors suffering if he's not having a drunk, at least not yet. He might get that way. We don't know. But I mean, I do think the interesting thing is the confessional is such a weird thing to me, because, like, and this is maybe just be opening up a can about Catholicism in general, but it's just so wild to me that a woman comes to you and says, "So I'm beating my child," and you're just like, "Oh man, you should do some prayers," and I'm just going to do nothing about that. I understand. Like, I first of all, I have a weird view on the confessional because my mom worked for my church when I grew up a Catholic the whole time. She was working for my church, so I was never going to confess, like, any of my sins to my mom's boss. I was just never going to do that because that would be wild. Yeah. So I just never did confessional. Like, I think you had to do first confession when you were, like, in first grade or something. And that's the only time I did it, and then never again, because heck no. But I've always found the thing a very interesting tradition in Catholicism. And I like the way in which King has kind of brought this tradition into this character who is suffering from, he calls it the spiritual malaise, but he's just so indifferent to the actual everyday problems and monstrosities of people.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny because I think the only confession I ever did was the first confession that they made me do. Because, and similar reason, I was just like, I don't believe you when you say you're not going to tell anyone.
Yeah, no way. You're at least going to, like, tell your staff or something.
Right. I didn't even have any secrets. I was just
no. I think my first confessional was, like, I was walking down the street in my neighborhood and I saw some micro machines on someone's driveway and I took them. That was my first confession.
Yeah.
I stole a micro machine.
I think mine was that I was mean to my brother and didn't listen to my parents, which
Like the kid from In Bruges.
Because not listening to your parents is a mortal sin. So, you know, had to get off. Had to deal with that, obviously. Because, you know, honor thy father and mother.
Of course.
Isn't it kind of horrifying to you as a child that was like one of the main ones? It's like, wait, like, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean I have to do everything they say? Anyway, this is a tangent.
I've never thought about that, actually. I just kind of always thought I had to do everything they say, whether or not a priest told me I had to or not.
I mean, I think it's like literally a mortal sin to not listen to your parents, which is, man, that's a lot of power to put in parents' hands, actually.
Some dad wrote that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, literally, I'm sure.
My kid's being a little shit. How do I get him to behave?
Absolutely.
Mortal sin.
Mortal sin. It's one of the worst things you can do.
Let's move on.
Yep, let's move on.
Father Callahan, evil, wants to face it. He's gonna.
Twice, at least.
Yes. All right, let's move on to chapter 7. This is Matt's chapter, not you, Matt, but the teacher, Matt.
Okay.
And this chapter is actually a relatively short one, at least compared to the last one we were in. But as the final chapter of part 1 of this novel, it serves as a great transition, as we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, as the book moves from circling around the creepy otherworldly nature of the newest residents of Salem's Lot to directly approaching them.
Mm-hmm.
But first, we start off wonderfully in this mundane friendship between Matt and Ben Mears, as Ben is coming to deliver the lecture to his class as he promised. The two have a little bit of a small talk here, and there's something about this whole conversation, and indeed their whole conversation throughout this chapter, that's just so delightful and endearing. Matt asks Ben if he went to college. No, he flunked out. Ben asks Matt what the school is like. What's the drug scene like? It's flourishing. It's just, I don't know. There's something like the small talk between these two characters. I just love.
Yeah. I agree. It's you buy that they're buds, and you know, kind of want to see them together more, actually.
Mm-hmm. And then I like this part. I happen to know our guidance counselor, who is one of the best in his line, isn't averse to toking up and going to a movie. I've tried myself. The effect is fine, but it gives me acid indigestion. You have? Shh, Matt said. Big brother is listening everywhere. Besides, this is my room.
I mean, I just think it's funny that the teacher would say that in the school, right? It just shows how kind of laid back he is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, that's the thing about, like, as we go through this chapter, we learn that Matt is not, if you close your eyes and think of an English teacher, that's not actually what Matt is. He's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of a cross between that and a hippie, but he's definitely not a hippie. Like, that would also be an incorrect label.
Sure.
It's interesting, though, because it's not like King is coming down particularly hard on weed, but I can't help but see this as part of the ongoing through line of substance abuse as a theme in small town New England in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe we can just say Salem's Lot as not even representative of small town New England 70s, but just representative of small town Americana.
Yeah.
And the way substance abuse is just weaving its way into that. I mean, I think you're right that, like, to say in your school that, yeah, I've smoked weed before is like, you would be fired immediately.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, it's just King, when something is in a novel, it's there for a purpose, right?
Yep.
And so here we're talking about, of course the kids are doing weed. The 70s, and it's like, it's almost like everybody just has all these terrible problems with their lives, and that they're resorting to using substances to distract themselves.
Almost as if.
Yeah.
So King cuts away before we actually get to see Ben's lecture, and while I understand why, because it's not important to the plot at all, I'd really just wanted to see King himself lecture some high school students on storytelling through the lens of Ben Mears. I think that would be an amazing thing to see, and I kind of wish he wrote it.
I know, me too.
Oh, well, we join him as he's going to Matt's house that night for dinner, and this is the way that the section starts out, where he's like, at first he thought he had the wrong house, because he walked up to this house and it's like slamming rock music. And once again, it's complicating Ben and our picture of this old English teacher. Matt, as it turns out, he's a cool guy. He's cool.
Yeah. He's I guess I am sort of starting to see him as a hippie, even though he doesn't present as one. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because he I think, I don't know, he says he's loved rock music since Buddy Holly, that's 50s, but just like the a person of a certain generation that was alive at a certain time and just kind of kept liking that stuff.
Yeah, it's like he's a hippie who was too old to be a hippie at the time.
Sure.
So he's like an aging hippie, except in the 70s when the hippies were just sitting in the swing. I don't know, man. I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 70s. I don't really understand any of this.
Me neither. I like this section here. I liked your kids. They ask good questions. Tough, but good. Like, where do you get your ideas? Matt asked, mimicking Ruthie Crockett's sexy little girl lisp. She's quite a piece. She is, indeed. God damn it. Why do people obsessed with this fucking high schooler? But this is actually, I love this bit, though, because I think this really illustrates what King is doing when he really explores all these side characters in the story, right? Like, Ruthie Crockett is not just a name that the book is throwing out because it needs to fill a name. She's a name we've seen before. We saw her in Sexualized by Bud the Dump Guy as he creepily envisioned himself fondling her. And of course, we know the name Crockett. This is Larry's daughter. So like, King has taken so many pages to really establish the town. It allows us to see these links. These names mean things to us. They're not just throwaway things. And it's showing the ways in which everything is connected. Everyone is connected, how things travel through this town because everyone knows each other.
Right. Once again, makes us feel like it's a small town, and we're starting to know everybody. We're becoming part of the town, and we know we're going to meet Ruthie Crockett again. I also like that, Matt has, or the, King has Ruthie asking, where do you get your ideas? Which is the question that King is tired of. Obviously,
he hates that question. He hates the question.
He's written like a whole essay about this.
Yes. Which once again is our Stephen King is just Ben Mears question. Right. We had one of our listeners reach out and say, I think a better discussion question for last week should have been, which character is closer to the real Stephen King, Ben Mears or Stephen King from The Dark Tower? And I think, actually, that's a harder question, the answer, than you would think.
That is fantastic. I love that.
So the conversation eventually gets to Ben's book, which Matt has successfully guessed is set in a place just like Salem's Lot. And Ben actually says it's about a bunch of horrific murders and sexual assaults. And the child disappearing and then the other child turning up dead kind of made him sour on the idea a little bit. But that conversation gets to those childhood disappearances, which we learn that the ones from years and years ago were almost all explained. 3 kids disappeared, 2 turned up dead, but they were just mundane deaths. And then one of them was just found working in Boston. But they still can't get over the fact that there's something weird about that house and the people up in it.
Yeah. If I were Ben, I would be sort of freaked out by how easily Matt completely nailed my psyche, and I'd probably worry that my book wasn't going to be all that like incisive if I just mentioned that I was doing a book and somebody was like, oh, is it about the Marston house and the recurrent power of evil? Because that's the book I'd be writing if I were writing a book.
I love that. I do think King is doing something interesting here where a lot of Ben's conversations with Matt are echoing his conversations with Susan. Like, they are kind of circling around the same stuff. They're talking about the book in a similar way. And of course, Ben is a little more reticent to reveal the full scope of it to Matt than he was with Susan, because I think he trusts Susan a little bit more. I think he eventually gets there with Matt. Yeah. And I think that's like, we've talked about the concept of quartet and these people kind of forming a team. And it seems like this recurring beat is meant to show the bond between them. The bond between Ben and Matt is not a romantic one, but it is something more than just acquaintanceship. It's like something is forming between these two men. Yeah,
there's a bond of true understanding and artistic sort of kinship and being on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Where they just Matt just naturally gets where he's coming from, and I think that Ben, he doesn't say this, but I think that Ben kind of respects his expertise as someone who understands literature.
Yeah. I think that's because Matt tells Ben he should keep the subject matter of his book secret, which is again another recurring beat. With Susan told him the same thing, and he actually comments that it's like, yeah, this is not the first time that I've been told that. And it's like we have this person that understands books and the town, and then we have Susan who is trying to escape the town and understands the town. Like, I just love that these are the two people that he's kind of revealed this information to, and they're both like, yeah, you can't tell this to anyone.
Right.
You can't. This is a really bad idea if you tell this to anyone at all.
Yeah, right. Because I don't even think Ben realizes it, but I think that the people of the town would consider it to be this sort of insult or blasphemy or just incredibly rude, if nothing else.
Yeah, and one of the things we haven't quite talked about enough, I think, is the like throughout both of the conversations Matt has with Ben, he is very incisive. Like he is very good at getting to the bottom of Ben's psyche. You're absolutely right, but he's also equipped with knowledge of what Ben's been up to, because like everything in the town is spread to everyone else. Like that's one thing that like he knows. He's been to the library, he knows what he's researching at the library, and it's not like Matt has set out to know this information. He just knows it because that's how this town works. We had that beautiful conversation about the telephone wire metaphor and symbol that King created, and that's just like that's how everything works here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
So we got I just like this line. Like, I know there's nothing romantic going on between these two men in the story, but like I just love the way King described this. Ben thought he had figured out the figure. So I think this is the two of them are leaving, and Matt is walking Ben outside, and he puts on a jacket before he does it. And we have here, Ben thought he had the figure of an aging track coach rather than that of a sedentary English teacher, if you ignored his face, which was intelligent yet dreamy and somehow innocent.
Yeah.
So this is not like, okay, let's be clear here. Ben is not sexualizing Matt here. I don't think he's into him in that way, but I do think this goes to show the bond. I mean, that like there are ways in which King is hitting beats with the relationship with Susan that he's also hitting with the relationships with Matt here.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I don't know why exactly. I guess he's just kind of noticing like this is kind of an objectively attractive human being. And I think I think that maybe also affects the reader on some subconscious level where, you know, maybe you had a certain impression of this guy, but now we're taking this opportunity to revise that impression and be like, you know, you probably nearly subconsciously just sort of slotted in a frumpy looking, you know, physically unhealthy middle-aged English teacher when this character was introduced. But let's just take this opportunity to revise that and show you that he's like physically admirable.
Sure.
And then that's just going to make you like him more. That's just the way we're built. That's just the truth. I think King knows that. I think he operates that way. That's part of why his protagonists are always like 6.5 feet tall. Also, is like it's just sort of subconsciously makes you think of them as like important.
Fair.
So.
I don't know if I've ever described a person I wasn't attracted to as intelligent yet dreamy, but I know what you mean.
It's totally what Ben Mears would do, though. So
sure,
because
this freaking writers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as Ben prepares to go, the two of them agree that they should team up with Susan and head on up to the Marston house this Friday for an informal welcoming committee. This sounds like a really great plan, guys. It's a really great plan.
Yeah, you got to admit it seems pretty badass that their reaction to this terrible otherworldly fear is like, yeah, let's go bring him brownies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just they partially just don't believe, they haven't fully bought into the otherworldly nature of it. Right.
Well, no, I think at this point they both are like unsettled in a vague way, but don't really believe in their rational heart that anything weird is going on, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But before we get to Friday, we have Thursday, because that's how days work. And Matt heads back over to Dell's bar for a drink that night. And as he walks through the door, he's scoping out the crowd. And I love how King handles this, right? We see like Dell's was sparsely populated on nights when no band play. Matt saw only 3 people he knew: Weasel Craig nursing a beer alone in the corner, Floyd Tibbets with thunder clouds on his brow. He had spoken to Susan 3 times this week, twice on the phone and once in person in the Norton living room, and none of the conversations had gone well. And Mike Ryerson, who was sitting in one of the far booths against the wall.
Yeah, once again, moving all the plot lines along very efficiently. We basically have picked up and just noted that things are continuing to evolve in the background, all within one paragraph, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because first, of course, Weasel is here because Weasel is always here, right? Second, we have that Floyd Tibbets part, and the likelihood of a Floyd Tibbets jealous rage incident is increasing, right? And then King just kind of casually mentions that, oh yeah, and Mike Ryerson is here. And as you're reading that paragraph, it just very casually said, oh yeah, and Mike Ryerson, who was sitting in one of the far booths against the wall. And we, the audience, are like, uh-oh. Because the last time we left this guy, he was staring at the open-eyed, not quite dead corpse of a 12-year-old boy. And then we left him, and now here he is, just hanging out in a bar.
Yeah, he's fine.
We don't understand what happened to him yet, just that something must have happened, and here he is. And we're like, oh. And then King turns up that tension die a little bit because the first thing Matt does is head on over to him to chat with him.
Yeah. He just check in on old Mike.
Just checking in.
He doesn't seem so well though.
No, he's sick. He's not with anything he recognizes. He's tired all day long and doesn't wake up till the nighttime. He can't keep any food down or any drink. It all tastes terrible to him. And he doesn't remember anything that happened at the cemetery, just he saw red eyes. So Matt decides to do the neighborly thing. And he invites Mike to stay with him at his house.
Yeah, he invites him in. That's great. That's great.
And before he gets to his house, though, there's this. Turn your head, Mike, this way. Mike turned his head obediently. Mike, where did you get those marks? Mike's hands touched his throat below the angle of his jaw. I don't know.
Oh, dear. What could be happening?
Yeah, the evidence is starting to compile here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very fun because, like, for a long time, the story was extremely cagey about what was going on, right? And then it's like, now that we've sort of crossed a certain threshold, it's just lumping it all on, and we're just like, oh my god, just kill. Why can't you tell it's obviously vampirism? Come on. But no, of course, no one would immediately assume vampirism.
Of course not. But Matt does, because he's an English teacher, right?
Exactly.
So he's lying awake at night, unable to sleep, and trying very hard not to come to the conclusion that an English teacher who reads a lot of literature would. He's thinking about things like Bram Stoker. He's thinking to himself, what you're thinking is madness. But his mind ran over old protections for an unmentionable disease: garlic, holy wafer and water, crucifix, rose, running water. He had none of the holy things. He was a non-practicing Methodist and privately thought that John Groggins was the asshole of the Western world. So, I mean, this is great, right? Like, we've gotten to the point in the novel where one of our characters is actively thinking about the thing that we've been setting up slowly over the course of the entire book. And as we prefaced a little bit earlier in the story, I think it's so fitting that he never says the word vampire here, right? Like, he says Bram Stoker, but he does not say vampire. He says unmentionable disease. It's like, even as the possibilities shrink down to only one thing, he still can't bring himself to say the thing. If it makes it real, if he says the word vampire. And so he won't say it.
Yeah.
And so none of the end of this chapter, even as we hear the vampire come into the house and start drinking blood, he won't say the word.
Yeah, no, it's great. It reminds me of the zombie movies where they never say zombie YouTube video by Joel Haver, which kind of want to link to people because it's hilarious. But
I've never seen that.
Okay, I'll show it to you, and maybe we can link it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we've gradually put all the pieces in place, and now King is allowing one of his characters to conceive of the possible reality, although it's kind of too late now. I mean, that's interesting. We end once again not having actually seen what it actually is. We hear it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I guess, one step closer to cutting away entirely. But it's like, is Matt gonna be able to do anything about this? It's already in the house, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the state of Matt as we leave this chapter. Mm-hmm. Like, I think, I mean, I'm trying to think of the way to phrase this. So we hear the high, sweet, evil laugh of a child, and then the sucking sounds, right? So this is Danny Glick drinking Mike Ryerson.
Right.
Did you think it was Glick the whole time? Or did you think maybe Barlow was involved? Like, was it being Danny himself? Did that surprise you, or does it just make sense because that's the last time we left him?
I think I was sort of agnostic about who it was until we heard the sound of the child's laughter. And then I was like, okay, so he's going to basically keep drinking Mike's blood until Mike dies. And then Mike is going to be a vampire fully. If he's not already kind of like, I guess he's becoming a vampire now is what you would say.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that a lot of modern vampire stories don't do, but is true of the original Dracula story. That the vampires, like it's over time, right? Like they don't drink you all at once.
Right.
They kind of come back over time and slowly drain you, and you kind of slowly waste away. This is how it happened with Danny Glick. This is seemingly not how it's happening now with Mike Ryerson. And that is different from the, modern vampire mythology where they just drain you immediately. And I mean, in like a lot of modern vampire stories, the way like biting and draining someone is not enough to turn them, right? You have to drink the vampire's blood to turn into a vampire.
Yeah, there's I mean, in some of them it's like literally a virus though. So yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't even know in what sense is there even a canonical, like this is the ground truth of vampirism. Like I don't know if such a thing even exists.
Yeah, I mean every thing has its own mythology, and this is working off of, I think, a lot of the Bram Stoker mythology, but also it's carrying all the changes in the mythology over that time. And of course, King defines his own mythology, right? We have our 3 types we know from Dark Tower, but you don't remember those, so.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, so one fun connection I noticed here was garlic, holy wafer, water, crucifix, rose, running water. So I have no memory of roses being a vampire deterrent, but it's very fun because the rose is a symbol of goodness and light and the white in the Dark Tower. So I mean, is are roses typically considered to be a vampire deterrent? I've never heard that.
I've never heard that one before either. Maybe like rose water, I think I've heard. Maybe possibly.
Yeah. Maybe that's it. Yeah, or just sweet smelling things. But yeah, I don't know. That's cool though.
I'm Googling it right now. It was once believed by many that the fragrance of a rose would ward off all evil, including not just vampires, but witches and werewolves as well.
Huh.
While the aroma repelled them, the petals were said to burn the vampire's skin like acid. So I think your connection there is spot on, because like the rose itself seems to be broadly an attempt to ward off the evil of the primordial Discordia.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right.
There we go.
Awesome.
There's our Dark Tower connection for the week. I mean, there's a bunch, right? Like,
yeah,
we're on our Dark Tower section now, but we've talked about them throughout the episode. Father Callahan, obviously, is the biggest one. We got to know him more than ever before. We've had the Eye of the Crimson King is here. We've had your rose. I love that. I don't know why I read that, but I just kind of read over it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a very innocuous element usually. Like that's the rose being this powerful symbol is something I still don't know if I fully understand in context of the Dark Tower either. Like okay, sure, but why roses exactly?
Mm-hmm. Why not roses?
Why not? Yeah, okay,
they're
sure.
pretty. They're pretty.
They're pretty. Yeah, there you go.
All right, Matt, you ready to move on to our discussion question of the week?
Let's do it.
Last week's discussion question was, what makes a house creepy, and how do authors like Stephen King and Shirley Jackson use these elements to create a spooky house? We got a lot of really good answers here.
All right.
Really wonderful answers.
So starting out, Pear Jane says, ooh, spooky houses. In the tradition of the Marston house, the first requirement of a spooky house is likely age and or abandonment. But I would attribute that to an overall theme that something is missing. Furniture is missing, rugs are rolled up. The only life left belongs to crawling things and ghosts. But I'd really like to focus on doors and hallways. Doors, of course, hide what's behind them. And only your bravery or the act of a foe will fling it open and pull you into whatever's waiting on the other side. whether it's into a junkie's head or in Hubie Marston's master bedroom. Doors conceal terror, and as long as they're closed, you're safe from everything but your imagination. Hallways are the spaces between doors, where your imagination has plenty of distance and time to visualize the hidden evil. If a hallway has a corner, no door protects you from what's waiting behind it. If you're being chased, you can only pray you'll find a door leading to escape. But if you don't, you might find yourself running through endless hallways, the unseen terror hot on your heels. Imagine the best hallways indoors. Roland and Susanna running in the tunnel, Diane saving her children in Poltergeist, Danny Torrance riding on his bike, Barton Fink escaping the flames of Charlie Meadows, Sarah lost in the labyrinth, Jake fighting in the mansion. Even aging Elvis in Bubba Hotep's nursing home faces long hallways and ominous doors. I have no idea what you're talking about. Evil is right there, but it's also just out of reach. This means you're in grave danger, but at this very moment, you're safe.
I love that. They also give reference to one of the most amazing spooky hallway scenes that you will get to read about in season 2.
Okay, awesome! Can't wait. I love spooky hallways.
Mm-hmm. Bubba Hotep is a movie, by the way.
Okay, gotcha.
Bruce Campbell plays Elvis.
Awesome.
OG Energy Vampire says the spookiest houses are the ones with history. Every house has the potential to be a spooky house. Most of them just haven't gotten there yet. When a house is first built, it's brand new with fresh paint and strong, stable foundations. It's full of initial life, of possibility, and the potential for goodness. Maybe a young family moves in, gets a puppy for their kids, and all is right in the world. But as the years go by, the foundation starts to sag, just enough that it's noticeable. There's a crack that the family can't afford to fix in the upstairs bedroom ceiling. The paint fades from a brilliant white to a dull gray, and it isn't given any touch-ups. The parents don't like their jobs, can't get promotions, and the kids always seem a step behind their peers. They're starting to get in trouble with the law. And the dog? Well, probably better not to dwell. I think OG Energy Vampire just murdered a dog. A house would absorb that energy, take it in, and grow resentful from it. After all, don't we say that houses have character, that they have personalities? Maybe the family moves away and someone else comes in, but like attracts like. Everyone living in the house growing more and more miserable, feeding off the dinky energy seeping from the walls, the blossom of mold growing unseen underneath the kitchen. Eventually someone hits a breaking point, and from that moment, blood soaks into the hardwood dining room floor. The house is gone. Because it tried to shelter and protect that first family, tried with less enthusiasm with each person after that. And what does it have to show for it all? Peeling paint, a weedy backyard, doors that haven't hung straight in years, and mice that itch their way unchecked through its walls. Its windows look out glassy, blank indifference to the comings and goings of the people infesting it. I love that. That's really great.
Oh, God.
You made me feel bad for my house and my weeds in the backyard that I haven't dealt with yet.
I need to be a good steward of my house.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get a really bad impression of humanity. No, that's really great. Yeah. I mean, it does sort of symbolize the way that time erodes everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's the spaces in which we live while time is eroding us.
Yeah.
Cool. Next, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam? Says, humans have an innate desire to know things. When we are faced with anything we don't know or can't explain away, it makes us feel uneasy and hypervigilant of our surroundings. This in turn makes our senses more attuned to the world around. We are actually hearing quieter sounds, seeing more sharply, and smelling more vibrantly. To me, spooky is about the slow burning fear, not the cheap jump scare. Closed or ajar doors, hallways, and stairwells are terrifying. Where do they go? What will we find on the other side? Are things where they're supposed to be, or have they been moved around? Spooky abodes are rife with strange sounds and drafts of air that in one's current state of mind cannot be easily explained away. There are dark crevasses and shadowy places for bad things to hide and linger. The architecture, layout, and design of the rooms can also create strong feelings of unease. What's with all the creepy China dolls? Why does the wallpaper look like it's crawling? Where does that odd door go? Why are those shadows keep changing shape? Sorry, why do those shadows keep changing shape? One spooky place that comes to mind is the basement of my great Aunt Edith's house. Aunt Edith was a large woman with a husky voice, and her house, decorated with doilies, smelled musty and soupy. The only bathroom in her house was in the unfinished basement. It was dark and dank, with a dusty water-stained cement floor, one bare low-watt light bulb, and hulks of junk strewn about, creating lots of hiding places for bugs and mice and dead things. And in the middle of this was a lone toilet, discolored and without a lid on the tank. We were terrified when we had to go down there. We'd grasp each other's hands, stay close to the center of the room, and squeeze our eyes shut when we weren't moving. When done, we'd race up the stairs as if the devil were on our tails, and then feel exhilarated that we had survived that basement once more.
I love it.
Some of y'all are just horror writers. Wow.
Yeah. This reminds me of my grandmother's house, and my grandfather and grandmother's house on my mom's side. So my grandpa had this house built, and he was like, it's stupid that we waste space in houses. So like every corner of the house, there's no empty space, right? So like if there's a little area behind a closet, they built a door to have a second closet behind the closet. And there was one closet that had another door behind the door. So there was a closet within a closet within a closet. And the entire basement of the thing was just filled with space. And they actually had a girl, like a homeless teen, live with them for a few months once. And so there was a whole bedroom in the basement. And as little kids, it was the scariest fucking house ever because of the things you're talking about. Like there was just stuff everywhere, and there were just hidden nooks and crannies. Like literally every closet had like a sliding door to go into a closet behind it. And they're just filled with creepy stuff. It was like the most fun and terrifying house to grow up and visit in, because we would go there. Like when I lived in New Jersey, my grandparents lived in upstate New York, and we'd go there for like 2 weeks during the summer and just stay there the whole time. And as a kid, it was just exploring this incredibly creepy house. We were terrified of that basement with like 6 different rooms in it, and they're all giant and just filled with stuff. Ugh.
Yeah, right. I have my own grandparent house stories, although I feel like we'll be here all night if we tell all of the creepy house stories. I think the one thing that jumped out to me about this description, though, was the idea of like shadows crawling and stuff, because I remember being a kid and like living in a house where there was a lot of just like wood. I don't know if it was, it's funny because now I don't know if it was just wood paneling or if it was real wood, and I have no way of ever finding that out now. But anyway, like just the appearance of like faces in the wood, and you'd be in your bed staring at the door, and you would see, the appearance of movement and faces and shapes kind of just appearing and melding back into the wood. I think there's something about like the child brain too that's like borderline psychedelic, where you're just kind of literally hallucinating a little bit all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would that would freak me out for sure.
No, I think you're totally right. There was also, so my mother was the youngest of 5 children, and one of the bedrooms was just where 3 of the boys lived. And there were 3 beds in this bedroom, and one of them was closest to the closet. Nobody wanted that bed because it was closest to the scary closet. And my uncle, being the amazing person that he is, would come in the middle of the night and open the closet door and then just leave. So we'd go to bed knowing the closet door was shut, and then wake up in the morning with the door open.
Oh my God.
It's so mean.
That is extremely mean.
Oh, we were so afraid. I loved it though.
That's
wonderful
awesome.
Memories. All right, enough grandparent houses stories. Next we have Walking Dude 22, who says, I've recently read The Haunting of Hill House for the first time. I also reread Amityville Horror. There's Salem's Lot and the Dock Tower. Some of the creepy houses here have worked better than others. I think the most important aspect of creepiness is the rot and decay of neglect. Empty, abandoned places are inherently unsettling. When we enter these haunted places, the odors of mold, the moisture, and the presence of vermin just drive right into our primordial brain. We believe that man-made structures ought to be places of warmth and safety. I can't talk today. So this contradiction disturbs us. It invokes our natural curiosity about why these places have fallen in disrepair. Every haunted house was once someone's dream of a shining future, but people get old and die, and future generations don't share the same dream. It seems a fundamentally human characteristic to imagine the worst reasons, to imagine a malevolence that probably wasn't there.
Yeah.
I love that. That kind of goes in with OG Energy Vampires answer, with he called it a story, but yeah, it's the lack of care, the wornness, the rot that makes those houses scary.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think a big part for me is like what could still be here that may have led to this house being abandoned. Next, we have from all 84 WHO 104 according to the Spielberg Poe King Lynch Craftian Real Estate Handbook, if your agent simply slaps the top of the house and tells you this baby is built on so many Indian burial grounds, then you're guaranteed to have the spookiest shit go down. Bonus points if anyone died during construction and was buried in the walls. Previous owner, some dude who murdered his whole family with an axe. Amenities include a loud boiler in the basement, running on pure hate in the bones of mistreated slaves, a ceiling fan possessed by an evil entity, rooms that defy geometry. Oh, and a basement featuring a never-ending labyrinth and void.
Wonderful.
That's great.
I'll take it.
So Scott, has anyone ever been to the Denver airport and seen the giant demonic Bronco statue?
I've been to the Denver airport. I do not remember seeing a Bronco statue.
There's a giant, like 30-foot tall demonic Bronco statue, which it looks like a nightmare. Like, it looks evil. It has red eyes that are actually glowing. It is an evil. I'm looking this up now. And it actually, this is not a bit. It actually killed its creator. It like fell on and killed the person who like designed it when it was being installed.
This is fucking terrifying. Why did they do this?
It's an evil, cursed, demonic horse. Like, I was definitely thinking about this at certain points in Dark Tower, because I was like, yeah, this is this fucking Blaine type like cursed Toadash horse. Anyway, it's
why
cursed.
Did you give it red eyes?
It's like if you're driving, if you're flying in at night and you're leaving the airport, you just see an evil looking demonic horse with red eyes. It's like, what is okay? So it's supposed to be for the Denver Broncos, right? But like, it's a monster. It's utterly terrifying. Yeah,
it's blue. It's a blue horse.
It's blue because the Denver Broncos are blue, but like at night it just looks like a dark black horse.
It's a blue horse with bright red spooky vampire eyes.
Yeah.
And all these pictures have like a giant thunderstorm in the background, which makes it worse.
Yeah, it's as bad as you're imagining, folks.
Dear Lord.
Yeah, I just brought that up because I was thinking about cursed things, and that's about the most cursed thing that I know of.
I love the rooms that defy geometry part. I think that's fascinating. There's so many scary stories about like, this is way bigger than it should be, or doesn't work. Like, I'm thinking of House of Leaves. I'm thinking of the No End House which was originally a creepypasta, but they made into a show. I love that idea. It's like, this is way too big to be here. The geometry, like, we should be in the backyard right now. This can't exist here. I love it.
Yeah, it's always fun.
Complicated 9519 says, spooky house time. Whatever the game Layers of Fear did, that's what makes a house spooky. I have never played that game. Have you?
No.
A real spooky house consists of at least one red room, blood red for love, brookwood floor boards or frames. And have you ever walked into an empty house and just thought to yourself, this shit don't feel right? Looming ceilings higher than they should be and odd noises in the dark. Anything with a horrible background to it is a house of horrors. My favorite haunted house would have to be Rose Red, Stephen King screenplay he wrote, where the house is always changing. Ooh.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Looming ceilings, but also like ceilings that seem too low. And I think one thing that I'm noticing the more I'm thinking about creepy houses is like the way sound carries wrong in some buildings or houses will make them seem creepy, and that can actually either be it seems to echo and reverberate too much, or it seems to like die the moment it leaves your mouth. Like, either one of those feels weird and wrong and will be unsettling if you're not used to it.
Well, that's the stuff with anything, right? Like, we just taught like a room where the ceiling's too high, a room where the ceiling's too low, a room where sound reverberates too much, a room where sound reverberates not enough, like a room where the measurements feel off, a room where everything feels too aligned. Like, it's just like you just take something and go to the extremes of one or the other. And I think it's a lot about what we expect. I love the answer. Like, people expect a house to be a place of safety. Right. And I think that's our obsession with the idea of a spooky haunted house, is that it is taking a home, a place of safety, the place of the most secureness, and turning it and twisting it into something that is terrifying to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Labratio77 says, in my experience, it's a house's story that makes it creepy. I lived in a town in East Texas that had a prominent house that was very much like the Marston house, but was its polar opposite. The people who lived there were beloved in the community, and it was simply sad that the estate holders had let it waste away. Contrast this with a church I went to. We held one of those church youth lock-ins there, and one of the kids started telling a story of how someone committed suicide in the church sanctuary, and now it's haunted. I had attended several services in that church, but after hearing that story, especially the bit where they said that there was a bit of the wall under the large cross on the wall that never truly got any light, you'd swear it did, but after hearing it, did it really? I never quite felt at ease when attending services there until we moved away. An abandoned house can be creepy on its own, sure, but to attain true full creepiness, it needs a good story. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I've never really been to like a haunted house. I've sort of, I think there's a kind of like almost like hypnotic effect that happens where if somebody tells you a good story and they're like, you know, the ghosts appear in this specific hallway at night, then like your subconscious is going to be amped up like 100 times higher than usual to be looking for ghosts and just really anything unusual. You're gonna interpret, the volume's going to be turned way up on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to be clear, I don't actually believe in any of the shit, but I went to the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, which is where Stephen King stayed when he kind of came up with the concept of The Shining. And they are very big on being a haunted hotel. And so they have a ghost tour. So I took the ghost tour and it was fun. Obviously I didn't see any ghosts because they don't exist, but like the tour guides are so into it, and I think they legitimately believe it. Like our tour guide, and I'm sure they tell the story every time, but he's like, I just started working here a week ago, and I'm telling you guys, when I came here, I didn't believe in any of this stuff, but just working here a week, I've seen it all, and I believe in it now. And then they show you all these pictures that they've taken from past tours where people saw stuff, and it's silly, but like I think there is a powerful psychological factor. Like when you crowd into a small basement room in the hotel and they turn off the light, and then they say, okay, now if we're lucky, we'll feel something. We'll feel some temperature change and stuff. Right. And your brain is a very powerful thing. Yeah. And if it buys into that stuff enough, it can create a feeling, a tone, an environment that you kind of, you buy into that stuff for sure.
And also, weird things happen all the time, actually. Sure. It's just when you have the excuse of like I'm looking for something weird to happen and the explanation I expect is ghosts, then that's the explanation you see. Like I'm just off the top of my head thinking about a story about like somebody dropped a key in a room and then the key disappeared, and it's like, okay, well, like, you know, then I asked like, okay, did it have wood floor? How did you know? Okay, well, you dropped it and then it slid along the floor out of the room into the hallway or something. Like there's always an explanation, but when you're looking for the spooky explanation, those explanations will not come to mind, right?
Sure. And houses make weird noises, and a lot of times when you hold a digital camera up to a mirror with a very bright flash, sometimes it like catches reflections from people that don't show up right. Like there was a lot of pictures they showed us of ghosts in mirrors, and it's like, that's just a dude that was standing off to the right, and it didn't show up right in the mirror, but it did. Like, I don't know. I don't want to, there's plenty of people that believe in this stuff. I'm not one of them, but it is like, I enjoyed the experience because like it gets you in kind of this, even me, the doubter, was in this like open to experience mode where you're just like in a certain state of mind, and it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, it is. Even for me, I agree.
All right, we have Domnambulist, who says, the first spooky house that comes to mind is the one from Kevin, Home Alone. The reason for it being spooky is that all of us can remember these situations when you're a kid and old enough to be left alone, hopefully not by mistake. You're still young enough to have a blooming imagination, and when it gets dark, of course you watch the kind of movies that make use of that vivid imagination. So after the film and too much ice cream behind each corner and in each room, you can feel, hear, and sometimes even see someone or something. As if this wasn't not already enough, the worst case happens from time to time. The house becomes alive and has human traits, such as an oven in the basement that wants to devour you. On top, you're already inside this living monster, not in a position where you can flee from it. The only way out of the horror is to somehow make it to bed and pull the blanket over your head. It calms down the root of all evil, your almighty imagination. And to circle back to our story, we all know that Stephen understands how to awake the most basic fears that you might have forgotten since your childhood. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of it does tie back to childhood. I think that's a great answer to end on, because the only times I can really remember being creeped out by a house are when I was a child, usually in a strange place, and your threat detection is off the charts, and
Yeah.
you're seeing stuff that isn't there, literally, in some cases.
I love the idea of not even in a strange place, but being young and in a place that you're not used to being alone, like your own house, and how that house can change when you're experiencing it from the perspective of alone in the dark in a place that you've never been alone before. And like that, I think that is something that Home Alone captures really well, that furnace in the basement and how that thing is just terrifying, and how, again, to go back to like the idea of a safe space becoming unsafe, and that primordial fear of that. And then suddenly your house is making noises constantly. Your house is always making noises. Things in your house move and settle, and there's weight and support. And so there's creaking and groaning and tinging, and it's moving around constantly, but you only hear it when it's silent, and it's terrifying.
That's true. Yeah. It's funny. I forgot this until now, but I actually stayed at a bed and breakfast last night, and and like at one point, like something fell off of a counter, which I must have just set it on the edge of the counter, and it fell off in the middle of the night. But it's like when you hear that, you're like, I don't know what that could have been. I don't really know where that came from, because I don't have like a mental model of the way sound moves in this place. And then you just kind of immediately you're like, okay, well, do I need to check on it, or can I just assume that it was something innocuous? And it's the kind of thing where if it happened at my house, I would just know immediately. I would know what it was and where it was, and I would just dismiss it. I would probably not even consciously register it, right? So yeah. Anyway, that totally happened. I keep having weirdly appropriate things happen within a close vicinity to podcasting. So it's this is there's still a chance that I am a Stephen King character, just not literally Matt Burke.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the final reveal of the podcast that you are.
I mean,
and this is
I am a 19 person, 19 letters. We can't forget that.
I do think, I'll just say this generally, that having dogs is like perpetually wondering whether there's a ghost in your house or your dog just like was playing with a toy and knocked something over.
Yeah, right. Well, don't forget, Scott, humans can lick too.
Oh my God. That story fucked me up. And like my dog sleeps at the side of my bed, like right where so like there are literally times when I reach down and pet her. And every time I think of that shit, every single time.
I'm so sorry.
Now I'm going to think about it tonight. Thanks, man. Thanks.
Oh, well.
But we're done. We're done. Thank you so much for all the answers, everyone. We really appreciate it. Just another reminder for you folks, we are recording the show earlier in the week. So we know we got some discussion questions last week after we had recorded. The same will probably happen again this week, but please know that we're not like intentionally ignoring you. It's just we're recording a little early in the week. So if you want those answers featured, try to get them in as early as possible.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And speaking of next week's discussion question, here it is. Matt, you picked this one, so you wanna read it for us?
The question is, name your favorite use of keeping something scary by not showing it.
Yeah, and I think this is in honor of the 3 moments in this week's reading in which we cut right when something bad's about to happen and don't explain what it is that happened.
Yeah, and it's just a kind of a fairly good and useful technique of horror, because really, when you fully explain something, it almost can't be as scary as it was before.
It's true, but why? And what instances do you think are the best at it?
Yes, please tell us.
Yes, please tell us. That is it for us this week at Kingslingers. Next week, Salem's Lot continues as we enter part 2 of the novel and cover chapters 8 and 9. More Susan chapters are coming, Matt. More Susan. We love Susan.
All right. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And a great place to hang out and answer the question and discuss is the subreddit r/doofmedia.
That's right. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts. Matt, I read that Apple Podcasts was having some issues because they're in the middle of a transition and some people's episodes were just not showing up. I don't believe we've had that problem, but if you are subscribed via Apple Podcasts and you suddenly wake up on a Thursday morning and our episode isn't there, that's probably what's happening. They've promised they're going to fix whatever the heck is going on, but it's out of our hands. So please be patient if that does happen.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll get it sorted out soon.
Mm-hmm.
If you like any of our shows and you want to support the Doof Network, then please consider donating to patreon.com/Doof Media, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah, we have a bunch of bonus stuff at every single level. We have another bonus episode of Other Levels of the Tower coming up in a couple weeks, I think. Maybe just 2.
Awesome.
We're talking about Thinner this month.
All right. Got to watch that.
Yeah. Of course, if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with everyone who loves vampire stories, which is basically everyone, right?
I mean, yeah, I think so.
And of course, you can help us out by leaving a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Joanne McGee, who gives us 5 stars and says, "What can I say except that I love this podcast? As a longtime fan of King's Dark Tower series, I was slightly hesitant to begin this journey. It's a long one to be sure, and I wondered if it would be enjoyable to take the journey with strangers. The answer to that is yes, and indeed, Matt and Scott feel like old friends after just a couple of episodes. They are both smart, funny, and are able to find so much meaning hidden in the text. They have helped me to understand this opus on a deeper level, and overall have made my second read through of the series so much more enjoyable than simply reading it alone. I genuinely get excited each time I finish a section, knowing I get to hang out with the guys and hear what they have to say. I cannot recommend this podcast enough for tower junkies and newbies alike." Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thanks. That makes me so happy to hear.
Yeah.
Welcome. I'm so glad to have you on the journey with us.
Yes. And I hope you are enjoying season 2 as much as we are, because I'm having a great time with this book, Matt. I'm loving Salem's Lot.
Yep, me too. I mean, pretty much every night we finish recording in the dead of night, and I'm like, all right, good night, Scott. And then I turn the book on.
This is a horror novel, right?
Yeah, no, it's the
spookies.
It's working on me. I mean, luckily I usually get tired and turn it off. So, but yeah, it's great. I love it.
All right, folks, we see you right back here next week as we continue into part 2 of Salem's Lot, where maybe someone's going to say the word vampire. I don't know.
We'll see.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.